challenge when you're using technology. Can you hear me now?
Does it work now?
Is it working now? Good morning. We're at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve. We're having a few technical difficulties, which we're working on. Great, wonderful. Our amazing team has figured out the technical difficulties. Thank you all very much. There's a whole team behind the scenes right now, and they have figured out our problem, which is fantastic.
It's called the mute button.
Oh, that's what it is. I've heard of one of those.
When you mute the output,
okay.
No audio.
Oh, is that right?
It's pretty
Goodness
shocking.
gracious.
But now it's working, so we're going to start back up.
Fantastic.
On time, and again, an exciting program. So welcome, howdy. My name is Roel Lopez. I'm with the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, and we're here at Bamberger Ranch at Leopold Live. Leopold Live is a virtual field day where we, because it's live and anything can happen.
That's right, Roel.
We go through and demonstrate, illustrate the various land stewardship tools that Aldo Leopold described. Aldo Leopold was the father of wildlife management. And in his philosophy, in his teachings, he talked about the axe, cow, plow, gun, and fire as the tools that could be used in stewarding and improving wildlife habitat. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been reviewing these tools. Today, we end with our final tool, fire. And fire can be used in many ways in improving wildlife habitat. And with me is Dr. April Sampson. She's the executive director of the Bamberger Ranch and a colleague and friend. And so she's going to introduce the tool and our panelists and our guest speaker for today.
Great.
April?
Thank you so much, Roel. Thank you for coming out to Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve with the NRI team for this wonderful partnership that's very useful to both students and landowners in terms of information about wildlife and habitat management. We're very proud to be partnering with the Natural Resources Institute. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to teach ethical and good land stewardship through education and outreach. And we're very happy to welcome you all virtually here today to Aldo Leopold's living room. It's a great showcase for those tools of wildlife management. So we are going to be talking about the tool of fire today. We have a great lineup for you in terms of talking about fire and its uses and how to engage in a prescribed burn safely. I'd like to thank our panelists who are joining us virtually. We have Amanda Gobelli, Dr. John Tomachek, Andy James, and Romy Swanson. And we really appreciate those folks being willing to join us to field some questions and to provide some additional resources to those of you who are watching today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our expert guest today. We're very, very pleased that he could join us today. He's sort of famous in the state of Texas. And
that's what he tells us.
That's right,
yeah,
exactly.
He's told us that 2 or 3 times.
He sure has. So I think it must be true. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our expert from the Texas Forest Service, Todd Nightingale. Todd, thank you so much for being with us today. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for that. Wow. Well, what a fun crowd. Yes, my name is Todd Nightingale. I am a Texas A&M Forest Service employee. I've been blessed with 23 years of experience in landowner assistance, landscape restoration, and fire, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Fire is an essential natural part of processes in Texas. It is a useful tool that is capable of replenishing soil nutrients, removing dead and dying vegetation. It creates conditions for healthy regrowth. And it's important to understand that historically, it took place on the landscape on its own. It was one of those things where lightning strikes would start a fire and burn off portions of the state every 3 to 6 years. So it's part of the very natural process that is supposed to be on the landscape to keep things in balance and in check. And one of the individuals who's implementing that is Mr. Steve out here on the Bamberger Ranch. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Steve.
Well, thanks, Todd. Glad you're here again, sharing your knowledge and expertise today for our installment of Leopold Live. Steve Fulton, most of you have heard of me. Don't know if it's good or bad. But we have used the tool of fire here on the ranch since the Bamberger Ranch was the Bamberger Ranch, especially in the initial phases of restoration, with there being a lot of slash material, basically a lot of juniper and other brush that was pushed up into piles. So just using fire to get rid of those brush piles. Not all of them, but most of them. So it's been a very, very useful tool for that. But also in the past 15 years, we've implemented fire as a tool on a more broad scale here on the ranch, on pasture-wide basis to really mostly to control encroaching brush or woody species.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
as Todd will tell you, we weren't the first ones to set fires.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're waiting for a second for something to catch up. The society's influence has definitely impacted fire on the landscape. We've seen a scenario where this prevention and suppression of fires has kind of taken that off the landscape over time, which, if you're not burning on a regular cycle with the natural process, it has the potential to create the risk for a larger fire in time. And then you also have the effects on the plant and animal life. The neat thing is we're at a point now where prescribed fire can be reintroduced into that ecosystem to put that back on the landscape. Now, we're not going to be the first people who actually utilize fire on the landscape. The indigenous people of Texas utilize fire on the landscape to push back the brush, to help stop woody encroachment. They would use it for ceremonial and cooking purposes. There was all kinds of different uses for it, for better ability to see their enemies coming. So this actually was a group of people that utilized fire on a regular basis for everything. If you lived outside all the time, yeah, definitely even something as simple as insect control, they would be understanding of that. So the indigenous people used fire for a long time on the landscape, and then we step into Texas as a state and using agriculture on the landscape. Texans early on used it for farming and ranching to clear the land and for doing improvements and making the land more usable for agricultural purposes. It was used extensively up into the 1900s. When you start getting into the mid-1900s, you end up with a scenario where we actually saw a decrease in the use of fire. And a lot of that was because people were becoming established. They'd have homes and improvements out in front of these locations. So putting fire on the landscape was not as easy as it was before. There was also a time through that time period where we started seeing laws and regulations come into place, because there is a liability to putting fire on the landscape, because anytime you light a match, you're liable for whatever that match burns. So that comes into the play. So very important to understand that component of it. The neat thing is we're starting to see this be reintroduced back into the state of Texas, and this is being done by prescribed burn associations. There's 11 of them around the state, and they're private landowners just like yourself that have started groups that bolster resources together so that they can all get together, and whether it's the tools themselves or it's just the knowledge and the manpower and woman power to get that done, they actually come in to do that. They have a fantastic website that has tons of resources, information, details about the laws and all the regulations, and all just great literature. It's worth taking a look at that if you're interested in this as a tool on your property. Beyond the landowner component of it with the prescribed burn associations, you also end up with the certified and insured prescribed burn managers. This is a program by the Texas Department of Agriculture. These are individuals who are licensed by the state that have insurance and training and experience to come out on your property, and you can pay them as a vendor to come out and actually put fire on the landscape. So, these are the kinds of resources that are available out there to help you out.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the legal side of it. Anytime you start a fire, of course you want to contact your sheriff's department or your fire department. Let them know where you're going to be burning, what time you're going to be started. Can't burn after sunset. And especially as a courteous to your neighbors, make sure they know too, so you don't cause unwanted anxiety. But as we've talked about it a few times with this series, fire is one of those tools that we use to set back plant succession. So without this disturbance, your plant succession will lead your habitat to a condition that might not be as favorable for all the wildlife that you can have there. You might not have the diversity when it reaches that climax condition. So fire, like our other tools we talked about, is helped and used to set back that succession, so you keep your diversity and really, not only controlling woody plants, that might be encroaching, but also the value of those woody plants once they've been burned, as far as herbivores, that value increases. Their palatability increases. Their nutrient level increases. Also, just opening up your area some, as far as if you have a lot of grass, or you have too much grass, or too much thatch, or too much woody species. There are animals out there. For example, bobwhite quail and the Texas horned lizard. They actually need some open spaces or more sparsely vegetated areas, and fire can be a tool to be used for that. Also, getting rid of all the down material or just the dead material that's hanging around. Without those maintaining fires, you might have a time where you have a more destructive fire come through that really wipes the slate clean. That's not what we want. We want to maintain a diverse, kind of middle of the road as far as plant succession.
Absolutely. You're talking about changing the structure of the fuels, in this case, the grass and the brush, being beneficial for different wildlife species or different agricultural uses. Very important, because the fire can be that tool that can change that structure and adjust that. It's important to understand that the plants that regenerate, because of the nutrient cycling, because you may have taken nutrients that were stored in a piece of vegetation that may not be as desirable, has been cycled back into, is now back available to maybe your target species that you want to have come back on the property. Trees that resprout are going to have more vigorous growth. Shrubs, will have produce more fruit a few years following that, as you've seen out here on this property. Yes. And then from a wildland firefighter standpoint, it decreases the fuel loading out here, and it makes it more manageable. So this is not one of those things that's a one and done treatment. The treatment may take multiple treatments over time to move the ecosystem back to where whatever successional stage it is you may be approaching to try to do that with. So when we start talking about fire, we're reintroducing this, it's important to understand the basics of fire. And we refer to this as the fire triangle. And you're going to talk about some stuff here in a little while about this, but it's also it's the fuel, the oxygen, and the heat. When those three things are present, we can have a fire. And that fire is able to be extinguished or stopped by removing any one of those components of that fire triangle. And as we talk about firing, we have common nomenclatures. That way everybody on the fire has a good understanding of what we're describing. Because when you start talking about putting fire on the ground, it's important not to say over yonder. It's probably more important to say we need you to go on the right flank, the left flank, the heel, which is back where the fire would be started, or to the head of the fire. That way we have an idea of where all those components are on that. In firing, there are different types of fire. People think of wildfires a lot of times. When we're doing a prescribed burn, it's very specific on what we're trying to accomplish. You can have something as simple as a backfire, which most of the time is utilized to secure one portion of the fire. It is a fire that is literally backing into the wind over time. And that backfire holds, obviously it's going to move slower. It's going to hold that heat and the dose at the base of maybe some of your target species you're trying to get rid of for a longer period of time. And it allows you to actually walk the fire off of a control line. We're going to start out with that today on the prescribed burn and see how things go. Once you get past that, you have the flanking fires, which would be parallel to the wind. And those would actually be one of those things where you're trying to bring the fire up on the edges a lot of times. And the final component would be definitely the head fire. And that's going to be more of what we think of with a wildfire, where it's running uncontrolled with the wind. It's going to be a very intense heat, but it's going to be a very fast heat, especially in these fine, flashy fuels like you have out here.
Yes, sir. When it comes to setting the head fire, you got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, because you really can't outrun it. So again, have all those precautions in place beforehand before you set that fire. Now, should we just go out here and just drop a match?
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, no, you're just talking about it. Yeah. Fire can be a dangerous tool to use. It's not like a cow is going to come up and bite you. The fire can come up and bite you too, and it's going to be in a bad way. So when you start talking about putting fire on the ground, you have got to have a plan. And that is not just something simple written on a napkin and running out the door. That is actually looking at the weather, the fire environment. Are we in a drought? What are the conditions? What's precipitation planned? What's the weather going to be after the fire? The slope, the topography, taking a look at the mapping. What are the values at risk all the way around that? What's going to be the wind, the cloud cover? And then with all that of what you're looking for as far as the prescription, we're going to actually come up with a test burn plan, which is basically what we're going to do today, see what happens. Then you're going to actually have a holding plan. So how do we keep the fire in what we're going to call the box? We want to keep it in that box. And then you're going to have a mop-up plan, which is going out and actually extinguishing all the heat that's out there on the property, because you don't want to walk away and leave it for somebody else to deal with or it get out and cause major problems. And then if you light enough matches in prescribed fire, you need to have an emergency plan. And with that, you need to have enough plan that you know all the components that need to be in place. And I'm glossing over this very quickly. Good fire planning is a lengthy process where you really have to know the details of what all needs to take place. And in that plan, once we have all those components ready to go, there's a go, no-go checklist. The go, no-go checklist you walk through, and if any of those components are no-go, the burn is a no-go. You will not be implementing that burn that day. If the weather's not right, if you don't have the adequate resources to hold the fire, any of those things come into that plan. You need to make sure that plan is very solid, because when you do that, we're stepping into go. And when you go, the notification needs to take place, like you shared with me before, contacting the local neighbors. They'd probably be real interested to know why smoke's rolling over their property, if that's the case. Visiting with all the local elected officials, your local volunteer fire department, the Forest Service, if applicable in East Texas, any of the entities that need to be notified, that does need to take place, because otherwise there's a fire out there is all they know that's taking place. So that's really important.
So much like with anything that's worth doing, you got to have that preparation. What does they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Does Texas A&M they have literature?
We have great resources.
Links?
Yeah, so we mentioned a couple of the other websites that are available out there through the Certified Prescribed Burning and the Prescribed Burn Associations. The Texas A&M Forest Service does have a website that has all of these components that go into a plan. It's a great resource to start understanding that process, and then may at that point engage another professional to assist you with that process, to making sure that I don't fully understand this component, or I need to get a professional vendor to come out and do my first few burns. And a lot of landowners I've talked to through the years have been very thankful they got a professional to handle the first few burns, to get that buildup of fuel back down to a manageable level to where they can start doing the burn themselves.
And also just get over that fear. I mean, people are afraid of fire. So just initially to have somebody that's a professional like yourself to help out with fires, that know what they're doing, so they can get over that initial fear and actually see how beneficial of a tool it is.
It's an amazing tool. It really is an amazing tool. It may not be for everybody. One thing that's worth mentioning with prescribed fire is smoke. We all own smoke. We're on a very rural location right here, but when the smoke gets up and out, that can be a component that may limit the ability to use prescribed fire in some locations. But rural landowners, they may have the opportunity to really to run with that at any time of year. And then with that timing, we do have different kinds of fires. There's fires that take place during different times of the years, depending on what your target is and what your objective is, which goes back into that planning component. There's dormant season burning, which would be in the killing season, when after the first killing freezes, and those will be this time of year when nothing's actively growing. And then you have the growing season burn, which would be more the spring and summer, where you actually try to run a fire through almost in wildfire conditions that'll actually do good control. And yeah, you definitely need to know what you're doing when you start talking about that. But, you know, depending on what type of burn and your timing on it, really needs to come into play on what it is you're trying to do, and then also take a step back and say, oh, this is going to negatively impact my deer birthing population, or I have nesting birds at this time. You need to plan those components into your burn plan, saying, wow, we can burn up to this date, but then I know we're going to have this wildlife species, bird, herbivore, anything else impacted by that, to be aware of it. And then when you get done with the burn, it's always good to take a look back. Take a look back and see, okay, what was planned? What happened? What results did we get? Would moving this burn to a different condition make a different result? And or changing up something in our burn plan, and learn as you go, because we're obviously taking a landscape potentially that has not had fire on it for a long time, and now we're putting fire into it. So figuring out what that looks like. But
we've talked about with our other tools, our post evaluation of the use of that tool is very important to see if that tool is actually valuable, or what you've done with that tool is valuable to your plan. Most of our fires here are conducted during that dormant season, late February, early March, for a couple of reasons. One, the human component. We do have hunters here on the ranch, and setting a pasture on fire when you have hunters sitting in hunting blind is probably not the wisest thing to do. So, but we also try to choose those days during that time period. Again, it's part of our prescription, where it's more summer-like. So you have warmer temperatures, maybe a slightly lower humidity, good 5 to 10 mile an hour breeze. Again, because our main goal is to decrease that woody cover, and you need a hotter fire to kill, or maybe not kill, but top kill a lot of those woody species. So talking about fire, obviously we have some tools to set the fire. We don't just use a match. I mean, you can, but it's going to take a lot of matches.
Yes.
We have some tools here that we will use to set the fire, to use fire as a tool. This is a pear burner. It's most commonly called a pear burner. Now, we don't normally use this to run a prescribed fire across a pasture, but we do use this extensively with burning brush piles. Now, just talk a little bit about brush piles and burning them and management of brush pile scars, burn scars. It's best to keep your brush pile small, so 100 square feet. You get anything much bigger than that, you're going to have a really hot fire.
Yes, that's right.
So, burning under conditions that are, even if it's a heavy mist or a light drizzle, that's actually the best time to burn, especially if you've had some rain prior to that, where you have some soil moisture. And all those precautions are there, so it's easier to recover that burn scar once that brush pile fire is out. When you have that brush pile fire, you're going to kill off some of the microbes. You're going to kill off the seed source that's in that soil, the top layers of that soil. So once the fire is out, some disking or light tilling, then adding a seed mix to that area, maybe even some product that has some microbes, some beneficial microbes in it as well, just to help recover those burn scars. Nobody wants to see those forever and ever, and it'll take them a long time to recover. So a pear burner is great for that, because you can light that thing on fire and shove it in the brush pile and
get it going.
Yeah. No matter how wet the conditions are. Again, you should have a plan in place for a brush pile fire as well. Make sure you have your fire breaks around that brush pile so it doesn't get away from you, because once that brush pile is started, you cannot get very close.
Yeah, that's right.
It's going to be very, very hot. Now, when we talk about burning off pastures, the most useful tool for setting those fires is a drip torch. You basically can set a fire as fast as you can walk, or run, as far as that goes. Basically, what you have here is you have a wick that's caught on fire. And we're going to demonstrate this here in just a little bit. And then out of this container that holds a mixture of about 2/3 diesel, 1/3 gasoline, it comes streaming out of this and drips, i.e. drip torch. So it drips fire, again, as fast as you can walk or as fast as you can move.
Good deal.
So that's what we have for starting fires.
Absolutely. So there's a few tools for starting a fire, but getting the fire started is not the issue. It's keeping the fire in the box. So as we start talking about doing that, there are other resources that are specific to a landowner's ability to control a fire and keep it within the area that we're trying to project. And Steve's going to walk us through a few of those.
Okay. What I have behind me is basically our fire suppression tools. So as you notice, we have a lot more tools for putting out fires than we have for starting fires. Anytime you light a match, one of the forward thoughts in your mind should be how to put it out. What am I going to do if it gets beyond my fire break? And being prepared for that. Here on the ranch, we have two of these 200-gallon spray rigs. These are our most important tools. You can put out a lot of water very quickly, and put out a hot spot, whether it's outside your fire zone or inside your fire zone once the fire is out. Now, also, we'll have strapped on the backs of whichever volunteers we can talk into coming out and helping us stomp out a fire. We have these backpack sprayers, and these hold, they'll hold as much as you want, but their capacity is about 5 gallons. Here to help us demonstrate these is our board chairman, Rusty Yates. And there you go. So again, very easy, just a hand-operated piston pump puts out enough water to put out hot spots along your fire break. Thank you, Rusty. Moving over to what we call a flapper. is another tool that we use quite a bit when we're putting out fires or black lines or so on and so forth. Now, this is not a tool that's used like this. No, when you do that, you're adding oxygen to the fire, and if you go back to that fire triangle, you're actually going to increase the intensity of that fire. So no, using a flapper is basically a smothering tool. You have a hot spot, you lay it over top of the hot spot, you stand on it for 30 seconds until that's out. Then you can move it, do it again. You'd be surprised. You can put out a lot of fires with one of these flappers. Depending on the size of the fire, we don't have it here today because we're just have a very small target demonstration fire. But if we're lighting an entire pasture on fire, we might have on hand some larger equipment that we can scrape in a mineral line, basically remove all the vegetation, get it down to bare soil to help control that, to keep that fire encircled inside the fire zone. Stuff like a skid steer with a bucket, or even a dozer that can really put in a mineral line quickly. Now, if you get to the point where this is your last tool and option to put out a fire, you probably weren't very prepared. But hand tools are used, especially in the preparation stages, to put in a mineral line or a fire break. Now, while we get prepared to demonstrate a fire, I'm going to turn it back over to April and Roel.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. So one of the things that we're going to do is demonstrate the application of prescribed fire. But I would like to take a few minutes to reinforce some of the things that both Todd and Steve said that are really important. I heard the word preparation quite a few times. 90% of a prescribed fire is on the front end. Getting that plan in place, getting the right equipment, getting enough help, preparing the fire breaks, the things around the fire, the target area that will take out one of those elements of the fire triangle. And so again, preparation and planning is key to prescribed fire. Another thing that I really liked what Todd said is, and Steve, is respecting fire. Fire is probably one of the most efficient and effective tools in wildlife management and forestry, in land management and land stewardship. But you need to respect it and apply it properly. And so they went through quite a few resources and links that are in the comments below that can serve to give you that background and guidance. And of course, there's various agencies, to include the Texas Forest Service, that are experts in this area that can, again, give you that guidance and direction in applying prescribed fire. So that's the first point. The second thing I would like to say is, this is the review of our 5th tool with Aldo Leopold's 5 tools, that being fire. We hope to continue the Leopold Live series early next year. So sign up to be notified via our Facebook pages, either Bamberger Ranch or the Natural Resources Institute, and stay tuned. Again, we're hoping to continue the series into the future to share some tips and approaches to land stewardship. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to April, and she's going to mention a few other things, and then by then we should be ready to light the fire. And I guess just to control any expectations, you know, there's a lot of things that go with prescribed fire, so the conditions may not necessarily be right. We think that the conditions today will be okay, but we'll see what we can do. So, April?
See. Yes, thank you so much, Roel. Thank you very much for mentioning the fact that we are really looking forward to continuing this really wonderful partnership between Bamberger Ranch Preserve and the Natural Resources Institute. And just to reiterate, everybody should stay tuned for information, for notifications about our continued journey together here through Aldo Leopold's living room. I also want to point out that, as Roel said and Todd said, there are so many resources out there that landowners should really take advantage of if they're thinking about prescribed fire on their land. The Prescribed Burning Associations, our colleagues have provided a number of links that are available to those of you who are watching right now. There's a link for information about where to procure safety equipment to make sure that you're engaging in using the tool of fire safely. And on that note, I'd really like to point out, before we go back over to our crew, that I'd like to point out how many of them you'll see. There's a number of people here, and that's really important to have enough people to where you can is not getting out of your box, as Todd described, that you're keeping that fire where you want it to be. And a lot of that has to do with enough crew to really help you do that.
All part of that planning process.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Okay.
All right, so with that, we're going to turn it back to Steve, and we're going to go ahead and go through our demonstration. Steve? So one of the things that you're going to hear in the background is obviously a fire pump, and both Todd and I and April will narrate what you're seeing with our camera on the demonstration area. There's going to be a little bit of noise, obviously, but for safety reasons, we're going to run that machine there in the background as we're narrating what we're seeing.
That's right.
So go ahead, Todd.
Okay, so what you're looking at right now is what we'd probably consider a test burn. It's a small area that's been identified to do a firing operation on that also allows us to not take on the whole project at one time. What they've done to prepare this site is actually mowed a perimeter around that, and that perimeter has been just mowed down, and then they're going back and establishing what they're referring to as a wet line at this point, where they're actually going to go ahead and wet the grass in the mowed grass portion. And what they're going to start doing right now is lighting the backfire. You can see the direction of the smoke. They're actually going to light that backing fire to start with, and what they want it to do is to back off into the wind from the wet line back into the little burn section that they're looking at.
And Todd, in essence, what they're doing is they're making the fire break much wider, aren't they?
That's correct, yes. So black lining or just increasing that with the backfiring operation, they're increasing the distance. If you were to have started this fire on the other side, it would have actually run to the other side of the test burn location, probably jumped the line and become a problem.
Well, the other thing that I noticed, Todd, is there's quite a bit of smoke, and that's very typical of prescribed fire or any fire. And so managing that smoke is it go through the fire, and he ran as quickly as he could. Smoke kills. And so staying out of the smoke as you do a prescribed fire is really important. It could overtake you and so forth as you're implementing prescribed fire. So again, being very cautious of wind direction and so forth is all part of that process.
And thank you for mentioning that, Roel, because again, that's part of your planning when you're thinking about where you're going to be and what you're going to do, and making sure that you're thinking about that smoke too. So thanks for mentioning that.
So they're moving slowly, and that's fine, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We want to put that black line on. We want to widen that fire break. The slower we go and the wider that we get that black line, the safer that fire is.
And it's worth mentioning now what they're starting to do is walking up along, there's actually a road on that side, that actually they are going to do a flanking fire at this time. The plan with that is to make sure that if we get a wind shift, that it does not go back across the road into an area that's not part of the target today. They have the backfire secure at this point, and now they're going to go back over and do the flank on the other side of the fire, basically creating a horseshoe around the fire. So if they decided to do a head fire, which was going and lighting the fire with the wind, that they would be able to, at that point, keep it within the box. And it'd be interesting on the post-assessment, and I'm not sure if we're going to have enough time during this process to actually see the post-assessment to make sure what was our objective, what was the goal on this firing operation. Were we trying to clean up something specific? And as you can see, they're figuring out the best locations to start the next ignition point. Is it burning the way we want it? And the nice thing is this is a low consequence scenario where we're able to take a look at this fire, take a look at this small little quarter-acre area, and did it do what we wanted it to do? And if it didn't, then we know it's time to stop. But once again, this burn specifically today is just for the benefit of the viewing public, just so you guys get a chance to see what fire on the ground looks like potentially the number of individuals it takes to support this, because you have the holding crew and the firing crew.
So you notice that Steve is the burn boss for this fire, and he's directing folks. He's making sure that his folks are always in eyesight, being able to know where your people are, being able to ensure that everyone's safe and so forth is all part of that planning process.
That's right.
And so they're kind of going through there, and Dr. Jim Cathy there is just making sure that the fire line or the flank fire is safe. We see Rusty and Ellen on the other side with some of those fire tools that Todd and Steve described. So it's a team, and they're all working together with the idea of, again, burning what you're intending to burn, not something else.
That's right. I'm glad you pointed out that Steve is the fire boss, because that's really important that he's designated as that. So everyone knows to follow instructions from him as part of the planning and implementation process for the fire.
Yeah, a lot of times when you get a fire that gets outside of the box, that initially starts the process of stopping all ignition at that point. And everything goes into suppressing the spot that gets inside the burn unit before any further ignition. Something's going to take place and threaten the line. This is actually going pretty good today, guys. I'm impressed.
The moisture, and that's one of the drivers there. So as they've gone around, hopefully you can see some of the
Technical issues, but the firing operation is going well, and looks like all the perimeter lines are holding, which was the objective.
That's good news, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's great.
Once they get the firing complete, there will be time to do complete mop-up and control of the perimeter of the fire. Just letting it do that, and a lot of times people go out and want to put out every little smoking ember out in the interior of it. And a small fire like this is probably applicable, but a bigger fire, letting those internal fuels consume is going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, incorporating your neighboring landowners into the process of letting them know what you're doing probably is going to help develop confidence in what's taking place. And just all of a sudden, the first time they see smoke coming across the fence line onto their property, you know, letting them know what's taking place.
And a feeling of safety, because, you know, one of the things that we learned from you, especially Todd, is the healthy respect for fire.
Yes. Yeah. It's different than all the other tools that Leopold recommended. It's one that's definitely lacking on the landscape. Mm-hmm. And it's one that has a huge benefit. What I really like about it is how it changes the structure of the vegetation type, and that does, you know, wonderful things for wildlife.
Right.
Because, you know, a homogeneous location that's all the same, it's not as good as opposed to a site that actually has a lot of diversity and pockets and, you know, mosaics. And nature's messy, and when it's messy, it's good.
That's right, exactly. When it comes to nature, messy is beneficial.
Provides different habitat opportunities for different species and different successional stages. And that's something probably worth mentioning. You know, we're talking about doing pasture treatments, but there may be opportunities where you could go out and do small treatments like this to create a small mosaic or pocket that's different. And then there may be a burning opportunity, another acre months later, that would be another burning opportunity that would create different ecotypes, basically,
right,
or different systems that are coming up on the site.
That's great. And so it sounds like that's all part of your plan. That's all part of your habitat management plan, your goals for your land, and thinking about how fire fits into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing too exciting.
No surprises.
Good job, Steve.
Way to go, fire boss.
All right.
So, okay, great. So thank you all very much for, thanks to the crew. Okay, I'll put my hands down now since Steve turned the motor off. Thank you all very much to the crew for demonstrating that wonderful small-scale prescribed burn. That's a great demonstration. You guys did a wonderful job. And Todd, thanks for the narration to let us know exactly what the fire crew was doing and exactly how they were watching the fire boss, Steve, and how that all was working. And so that's been a really useful demonstration. We would really, really encourage all of you viewers to send in your questions. Some of you may have already done so. Send in questions. We've got our expert panel, Steve and Todd, ready to answer your questions. They're back. Steve is back out of the fire line and ready to answer any questions that you might have in terms of resources that are available, questions about when fire is, when you want to use it and when you don't, anything like that. So please go ahead and send those in. We are great.
So at this point, any questions for Todd and Steve? I think overall, just give us your post-evaluation.
It burned better than I expected. That's why I went ahead and set the head fire. Now, I don't know if you talked about it, but you may have heard me holler kind of loudly that I was about to set the head fire. If this was a larger burn, we all, of course, have some sort of communication, whether it's walkie-talkies or two-way radios, where that would go out over the airwaves. About to set the head fire. That means get out of the target area because that head fire is coming through quick.
Yeah.
And one thing that we'll do is ask Jared to zoom in and look at some of the effects there. And maybe you could kind of talk to that. What would you expect to see?
Well, I was hoping, if the conditions were a little drier, we've got a lot of humidity and there was some moisture down in the grass. If the conditions were a little drier, I would hope to see just a blanket of black, where it was all charred down in the ground. As it is, we did get quite a lot of most of the leaf material did burn up at the base of the plant, but it did leave behind some of the inflorescence, some of the seed stalks of the KR blue stem.
Is that necessarily bad from a wildlife perspective if you have sort of a patchy burn like that?
It is not, definitely. Again, it depends on your prescription. If I was burning a native grass pasture, yeah, that kind of blotchiness is actually what you're looking for. Because naturally, there are going to be areas that's going to burn better than others, areas that's going to have lower fuel loads than the next area. This, however, it was KR blue stem, an invasive grass here that we have that we're trying to deal with here on the ranch. I was hoping for a more complete burn. So the rest of these pastures, which you can't see on camera, but we have about 15 acres here that we have some KR invaded. I'm going to wait for a little more volatile conditions and make sure I got my fire breaks in good and strong before I light it up. So I want it to really burn up as hot as I can.
Yeah, you're talking about the targets of what you're trying to get rid of, and as we're standing in this beautiful location out here on the ranch, the other thing is the targets you don't want to impact, like the pecan trees, the trees going up slope, and some of those things. Can you speak to that some about what you do when you get close to these resources that are very valuable to the aesthetics on the property?
Definitely. Beforehand, especially if there's any brush near the base of that tree, or actually climbing up into the tree in the case of greenbrier, which has a lot of wax, and it burns very hotly and very quickly. You want to remove all that material of those trees that you don't want to harm. You want to remove that material away from that tree. If there's grass up to the tree, you want to kind of mow it down short. You can even go in beforehand under more mild conditions and put in some black lines just around that tree. Any branches that are close to the ground, trim them up because they might catch on fire. And again, it all depends on the conditions you're burning under. But a lot of these trees we have here, do have a thick, corky bark, so they can handle a brief amount of fire against their trunk. Good. One thing to look out for is those hollows in those trees. I know you've got some experience with hollow trees.
Absolutely, yeah. You don't want to get something on fire that takes a lot of effort to put out.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, Todd and Steve, there's several questions from our audience members. We're gonna go to both cameras with Brittany and April, and they're gonna ask some questions for you. If you could respond to them, that'd be great.
Thanks, Roel.
So one of the first questions here is from Jessica. How do you know which way the fire is going to go after it's been ignited?
that's all to the wind. You want to make sure which direction the wind's blowing. Now this spot is a bit tricky because we're down in the bottom next to a creek, so the wind does change direction slightly. It never did a 180, but how many degrees of difference would you say?
Oh, yeah, you probably had a good 120-degree swing on this fire.
Yeah.
And you're going back to those planning resources, you're looking at the weather, what's forecast and what actually ends up happening. And you're doing all that in the planning process. What's your preferred wind on this location, knowing the smoke's going to go downrange? And then you actually take a look at that. So you're looking for a very specific wind direction, relative humidity, temperature, cloud cover, the fuel conditions. So you're planning all that stuff in advance. We know which way we want the smoke to go. The predominant wind is actually going to, or the predominant wind is going to direct which way the fire's going, and then the ignition direction. So starting from the backfire, the flanks, looking at the head finally. There's also different ignition techniques out there, dot ignition. There's a shamrock where you come from high topography going down. There's different, it's an art and a science. That's very important to understand. It's not like you're going to walk away from this with a doctorate in prescribed burning. This is just a teaser, and you'll spend the rest of your life becoming an artisan and understanding more so about how this works.
I've got a question here from Robin about maybe some recommendations on weather resources that you guys use.
Sure.
That are reliable.
I use, not advertising for anybody, but I use Weather Underground, but also I will consult several of your web-based meteorology websites and try to take a consensus. But if I was to go off of only one, if I only had one option, I'd go with Weather Underground. They seem to be right most of the time. For meteorologists, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna say that.
So if you go actually to our planning page on the Forest Service website, there's actually a component there that gives you access to NOAA, National Weather Service, and those are resources you're going to want to delve into to get real specific, especially for the region that's covering the area where your burn's going to take place. So those are, the governmental resources are very valuable, and I'm with you. Sometimes those third-party vendors, they actually have stuff that may be localized more accurate, and you've watched it for over time, and it is useful.
Because I know just from my experience with weather, they do have a station, a weather station, just one county road away. So it's within 2 miles as a crow flies. So it's pretty much on the nose when I consult.
And that comes from experience watching the weather on that property and knowing that, when that storm said it came over the property and you actually were standing here and the storm went over the property, you've developed that confidence in that resource.
You couldn't just go out and just lick your finger and put it up in. No, I'm just joking. Don't do that.
So, but all kidding aside, so there's local weather through a service like you described, but there's also tools that you could use on site.
Okay, sure.
And so an on-site weather station and so forth, fairly inexpensive, could be used to kind of get the data at a micro scale level, because canyons, cover and so forth could change. And boy, I can't emphasize the idea of wind. Wind really is your driver, and the intensity, the direction, where smoke is going, and it changes. And so being prepared for those changes is part of your plan.
That's
right. Just could you guys speak, I guess, if you have any experience burning cedar breaks?
I normally use cedar breaks as a fire barrier, as one of my fire breaks. But I'm not trying to burn during the growing season or in August when it's 105 and dry as a bone. That's about the time when you can actually get a cedar break to burn. And
that's probably not safe. You don't want to do that. But tell me about a cedar break as a fire break. That's an interesting concept. So explain that to me.
Under normal conditions, if you had normal rainfall conditions and it's not just the dead of the summer, say spring or like we're talking about a late winter or early spring burn, that cedar actually has a lot of moisture in it. And
no fine fuels typically underneath, so it's almost really a natural break, right?
It can be used as a natural fire break.
Can be used. You need to definitely know the underlying conditions, because for every time that can be, I've been out on a situation where we were just going to use that as the break, and we're off in the canopies of that cedar tree, because of the underlying drought or something. But that's a good comment. But definitely want to know the true underlying environmental conditions with that fuel before using it as a fuel break.
Absolutely. course, anytime we use a natural fire break like that, we'll go ahead and put our black lines or mineral line in front of it just to increase that fire break. But roads, like our paved road you might have seen over here, also make for great man-made fire breaks, permanent ones.
We have a couple of questions about just wildlife in general. So the first one is, how does a winter burn help create good conditions for white-tailed deer?
Well, a winter burn will actually stimulate growth, especially here in Texas, especially this part of Texas and further south. I mean, we don't have that many days that, especially in a row, that's freezing. We might have a night that gets into the freezing, then we have a week or a week and a half where it's 70 to 80 degrees. So you run that fire through there, you get those warm days following that, you can actually stimulate some growth.
Yeah, and then you can also be taking the nutrients that are locked up in maybe a non-palatable or non-favorable vegetation type for the white-tailed deer and recycle that back into the resources that are there that may go into a forb or number 1 or number 2 browse species for that white-tailed deer. So changing that structure, providing access, some of these things that just allow maybe more sunlight to reach a target vegetation type.
Or hard mass. So it's very difficult for wildlife to find acorns and so forth in tall grasses. So you burn an area, and it's not going to be surprising to see some of the turkeys here at Bamberger come into this pasture where they're looking for resources, food resources, to include acorns and things of that sort. So there's multiple benefits for a winter burn.
And then come springtime, it's just going to be that much better.
That's right.
It's going to be, you'll have gangbuster animals out there.
Okay, very last question from Jessica. For large fires, is there a way to effectively clear wildlife out before starting the fire?
Most of your wildlife are going to leave.
Yeah,
if they can, they will leave. And then you have your more fossorial animals. That means the ones that live in the ground. A lot of the again, this area, most of Texas was fire prone in past history. So a lot of the native animals that live here build their tunnels systems where they have more than one entrance or exit, which gives them some airflow so they don't suffocate during a fire.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's a very good assessment. Yeah, because they came in an environment that had fire in it, putting fire back in the environment. Very rare that they are impacted negatively in a big way.
Yeah. And you will. I mean, some insects will be burned up in the fire, but once that area starts to regrow, the number of insects, and we've actually done studies over this here on the ranch using kids as our citizen scientists. The number of insects just increases dramatically post-fire once that stuff starts growing back.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. That's a lot of really good information. Thanks for those great questions that people sent in. We really appreciate you being here, Todd, to help us demonstrate the tool of fire. And thanks, Steve, for all your hard work and making sure that we had a really nice demonstration for the viewers. Thanks to the fire crew. You guys did a great job. We just want to say that we have really, really enjoyed this Leopold Live series. As we said earlier, we're looking forward to next year and continuing to partner with the Natural Resources Institute. So definitely keep your eyes open for that. We just want to remind you that here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we're a 501c3. Most of our programs are actually shut down right now because of the current situation. We do have a fall hike, a self-guided fall hike going on. So definitely check that out on our Facebook and our website. We'd like to thank the commentators that I mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for being willing to help us field some of the questions and provide some more resources for landowners doing research and investigating about whether fire is appropriate for them. And we also want to make sure that you follow the Natural Resources Institute and Bamberger Ranch Preserve on Facebook. Sign up for our notifications. And we, what is that? Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, crew. We also want to make sure that we invite you to join us again next week for a special segment that we are going to have here for you. And it's going to be really cool. So make sure to, again, sign up for notifications, follow us on Facebook so that you'll know about what we've got in store for you next week. And the other very important thing that I'd like to say is that we definitely would love to hear your suggestions for ideas and ways that we can provide in partnership with the Natural Resources Institute information to you as landowners and as students that help you manage your lands in a way that is conducive to good land stewardship in the way that Aldo Leopold championed. So please send in comments, suggestions, more questions, ideas, things that you'd like to see us provide to you. Once again, thank you so much to all the crew that worked so hard, did a great job of bringing this all together. Thank you for the behind the scenes crew that solved our technical difficulties. Thank you again to Todd and all the other experts that have joined us over the course of this wonderful Leopold Live. Keep in touch, make sure to follow us, and we'll see you next time.